Hey everyone, this is Rosie, and today I'm making the Maisie Bowler handbag by Swoon sewing patterns with a no drop-in lining. So let's get started. If you would like to sew along with me and you need to purchase the pattern, I do have an affiliate link in the description below the video for you to do so. As always, you want to read through all of the pattern instructions before you get started. This way you know what to expect as you're sewing the project, and it also gives you the opportunity to plan some modifications. You also want to make sure that you print out your pattern actual size or 100%. And in this pattern, the designer gives you a 3-inch test square. You want to measure that test square from side to side and from top to bottom. And if it measures a true 3 inches, then you know that you've printed out your pattern correctly. Now I am going to make some modifications to this bag. I will talk about some of them as we review how I've prepared my pattern pieces. The other thing is, because of the materials that I'm using, there's going to be a lot of bulk in this bag. And I will be sewing on the Juki TL 2010Q. And my machine did struggle with the materials that I'm using. So I will be talking about how I'm going to reduce some of the bulk for this bag. First, I want to talk about how you can reduce some of the bulk in making this bag. Now, I've already made the same exact bag on my Juki TL 2010Q, and my machine actually struggled through the materials that I used. So if you want to reduce some bulk, I'm going to give you a few ideas. First of all, in my bag, I use the Bosal brand of foam, and it's pretty thick and it's actually pretty dense. This one here is the Pellon brand, and it's thinner than the Bosal, and it's not as dense when you press it. So if you need to reduce bulk, you might want to consider using the Pellon brand. I'm actually still going to use the Bosal because it's what I have on hand. I don't have enough of the Pellon to make the switch. Now I am going to be using piping. I've made my own piping here, but you can eliminate the piping to reduce bulk. I personally think that the piping really adds a lot to the bag, so I'm still going to use my piping. But one thing that I am going to change is I'm not going to put on the side pockets. I did put on the side pockets in the first bag that I made, and my machine really struggled with it, so I'm leaving those out. Here are all of my lining pieces. I used 100% cotton quilting for all of these pieces, and every single piece has been interfaced with Woven Fuse 1. And I cut out all of my lining pieces exactly the way the pattern says to. And I will be using a number 5 zipper for the interior zippered pocket. Also, since I'm doing a no drop-in lining, I need a way to turn the bag, and I will be leaving a big enough opening in the bottom of the lining in order to turn the bag, and then I'll just hand stitch the opening closed. Here are all the pieces for the exterior of my bag, and I'll go over this very quickly. First off, I'm using 100% cotton quilting fabric for the gusset part of the bag, and she calls it the top panel and the side panel. I call it the gusset. So this is 100% cotton quilting fabric. It has been interfaced with Woven Fused 1. And then we're also going to be applying some foam to it. Now, what I did is the pattern calls for a 1-inch wide zipper. I have a zipper here that is 1 1/4 inches wide, so I had to modify the pattern piece a little bit. In the instructions, there's a dotted line here on the pattern. She tells you to either fold over or cut this off, and this will be your pattern piece for the exterior top panel minus this 1/4 inch strip right here. So in order to accommodate my wider zipper, I actually cut off 3/8 of an inch, and then this became my pattern piece minus the 3/8 inch strip up here. Then what I did is I cut a piece of foam with a straight edge, and I marked a line 3/8 inch down from this long straight edge. So there's my 3/8 inch line right there. This is the straight edge that you will put your zipper into. And I placed that foam right up against that line that I marked 3/8 of an inch down from the top, and I cut the piece of foam out a little bit larger than it needed to be. And then I went over to the sewing machine and I sewed or basted all around these 3 edges. I did not baste along this top straight edge here. And then after I basted it, I just trimmed the foam even with the edges of the pattern piece. And cutting off that 3/8 of an inch will accommodate the wider zipper. Then for the side pockets, I again wanted to eliminate some of that foam. So what I did is I drew a line 1/2 inch down from this top straight edge right here. So right along there, I drew this 1/2 inch line. I cut a piece of foam with a straight edge, and I put that straight edge right up to that 1/2 inch line. And that 1/2 inch line is your seam line. So what I've done now is I've taken the foam out of my seam line. And then again, I cut the foam a little bit larger all the way around, and I clipped it all in place, and I went over to the sewing machine and I basted around these edges. I did not baste along the top. You can see that here. And then I trimmed everything, and now that foam is out of the seam line. Then for the body of the bag, I'm using glitter vinyl. And again, I've cut out a piece of foam that is a little bit larger. And then I went and I basted all around and I trimmed the foam. Now for the glitter vinyl, it only has the foam on it. There's no other interfacing in here. Then this piece here will be for my bottom panel, and I did interface it with some Decovil Light. I put 2 layers of Decovil Light. Now if you're using vinyl, you will need to do a little test before you heat fuse any interfacings onto your vinyl. I just used a lighter heat setting and it seemed to work out well. I didn't have any issues with it, but definitely test first before you fuse anything to your vinyl. Then I have these strap connectors here. I also use the glitter vinyl for these pieces. I have not fused them with anything. And the important thing is they need to be mirrored. So you'll take your pattern piece and put it down on your fabric, vinyl, whatever you're using, with the printed side of the pattern up. And then you want to flip it over so that the printed side of the pattern is down, and cut out 2 more pieces. So you'll have 2 in this direction and 2 in this direction. They need to be mirrored. And then I just cut out some glitter vinyl for my handles. Then some other things you'll see me using in the video is some double-sided stick tape. You will see me using a friction pen, and as always, I'm only using it for demonstration purposes. In real life, I only use it to mark lines that I'm going to cut on, because this ink will disappear with heat, but it comes back with cold. And then I'm using my favorite thread, which is the Gutermann Mara 70. I'll be using some fabric tack glue. I will definitely be using a bunch of Wonder Clips. Now, because I said that the bag has a lot of bulk to it, it's going to be hard to do the assembly to keep all of your pieces together. And because I'm using glitter vinyl, the glitter vinyl is actually very slippery, and I had a lot of trouble just holding the pieces together because of the vinyl being so slippery. So I have these binder clips. You can get them at any store like Staples, any stationery store. They're just the small ones, and they work really well. Then I have some nice rainbow rectangle hardware, and I also have some D-rings. And these D-rings are actually 1 inch wide. The pattern calls for 3/4 of an inch. So I will just make some adjustments for these connectors. This will be step 2A and 2C in the written pattern instructions, which is to prepare the vinyl connectors and sew them to the main panels. So I start with one of the connectors, and I'm going to use my double-sided sticky tape right here at the top. And that's the top of the connector. These little wings here will be folded towards the center. So I'll just remove my paper. This is the release paper on the sticky tape. Now my tape is exposed, and I'm going to fold each one of these towards the center. Then once I have those wings taped down, I take my ruler and I'm just going to score a mark 1 inch from the top. I'm not really looking to make a mark here that I can see. I'm just sort of scoring the vinyl to make an impression into it, and that'll be like a fold line for me. Then after I've done that, I just take it and I fold back on that score line that I just created with the pen, and then I can slip one of my hardware pieces on there. And then after I have that in place, I take my sticky tape again and I just secure it down with the sticky tape. And that will hold it in place for me while I'm sewing. Then I just put a good amount of tape around the entire piece, and this will hold everything in place for me as I'm sewing. Once I've finished putting the hardware onto the connectors, I like to take both of them and line them up all edge to edge. And what I'm looking to see is whether or not the tops of both of the connectors are even with each other. Sometimes if we don't fold down correctly, we could have a situation where one is a little bit higher or lower than the other. So if you just put them back to back and edge to edge and follow it all the way up, you'll see if your connectors are even at the top. And then once I have my connectors ready, I can bring in my panel and I'll just remove all of the tape. And then once I have all of that release paper off of the tape there, then I can just go ahead and line it up. And that tape will hold this down very nicely for me as I sew around. Make sure that your edges are even here and here. And then just lay it down nicely. And then you can go ahead and put on the other side, and then we will sew it. Then once I have them stuck down with the tape, I can just look it over. If I need to make any adjustments because I've used the tape, I can simply just pull back and make any needed adjustments. I'm sewing on my Juki TL 2010Q, and I have installed on here for my foot the Juki narrow hinged zipper foot, and that will allow me to stitch 1/8 of an inch all the way around the edge here. And I'm stitching with a stitch length of 3.5. You can do a little back stitch if you want, and all you're simply going to do is follow the contour. So when you get here, you'll just pivot and then just go slowly around and follow the curve. Now, if you need to adjust a little bit for the curve, you can lift your presser foot and turn it a little bit, but don't take more than one stitch at a time to go around the curve. So every time you need to adjust, go one stitch. If you're able to continue without readjusting again, then go ahead and do that. Now, as I get up closer to my hardware, I want to stop just before these feet really hit the hardware. So about right there. Now remember, we folded this down 1 inch. You have to make sure that your presser foot is beyond that 1 inch, because that needs to be caught underneath in the stitching. Then I turn, and I'm going to count how many stitches I stitch across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now I'm going to go back 7 to reinforce that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I'll go forward 7 more, and then I'm going to pivot again. And then I can turn. And now I will sew down the other side. Just follow the curve around. Then you'll go ahead and sew in the other connector exactly the same way, and when you're done with this panel, you go ahead and complete the other panel just the way you did this one. And here are my connectors sewn on to both of the main panels. This will be step 3 in the pattern instructions, which is to install the zipper into the top main panels. So you want to take your zipper and place it face down on one of the panels along the long straight edge. You're not sewing it into the curve edge, you're sewing it into the long straight edge. And I'm just going to clip it in place, and once I have this clip, we will sew it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all along the length, and I will probably be sewing from the zipper side. You're going to sew in one side at a time. I don't like to clip both sides at the same time and then go sew them. I like to do them one side at a time. But remember, there's no right and wrong in sewing. It's basically what feels right to you, what you're comfortable with. Now I'm sewing the zipper into one side of the top panel with a stitch length of 2.5 and a seam allowance of 1/4 inch. You can back stitch at both ends and make sure that the tape of the edge of the tape for the zipper stays even with the edge of the panel. Now when you get to where your zipper pulls are, you can stop with the needle down, lift, and then just pull those zipper pulls past your presser foot. And then you can sew to the opposite end. Now you'll want to take the opposite panel and clip that to the opposite side of the zipper, and when you do, make sure that these edges are even. So you want this edge even with this edge. And then you can go ahead and clip it and sew the other side exactly the same way. Here are the top panels with the zipper sewn in between. If you remember, I modified the pattern piece for the top panel. Instead of trimming away 1/4 inch from the long straight edge, I trimmed away 3/8 inch along the long straight edge to accommodate my 1¼ inch wide zipper. So here is the end of the top panels, and here's the side panels. And you can see that modification works out perfectly. Now we're up to step 4, which is to prepare the side panels to be sewn into the top panels. So you want to take one of your strap connectors. I've had to make mine wider because I'm using 1 inch hardware instead of 3/4 inch hardware, but it's the same thing. I drew a line down the center, and then I folded each long edge in toward that center. Then once you have that pressed in place, go over to the sewing machine and stitch 1/8 inch away from each long edge here, and I'm going to do that off camera. Now that I've done that top stitching, I'm going to take this and fold it exactly in half, and then I'm going to cut it in half right along where that fold is. So now you have 2 connectors, and I'm going to take one of them and slip my hardware on there, and I'll meet the raw edges. And then I'm going to take one of my side panels, and I'm going to clip this directly in the center of your side panel. So you'll want to find where the center is and then clip it in place, and then at the sewing machine you can base this on here for now. and prepare both of your side pieces exactly that way. Now I have my connectors and my hardware basted onto both sides of the side panels, and now we can take the side panels and clip one to each end of the top panel. So we're going to clip it, and then we're going to sew it in place. And you can actually turn it over and sew it from this side and follow along that 1/2 inch line that we drew before. Now when you clip in that side panel, make sure that the zipper tape is laying flat. So you want that to be sewn down flat. Make sure that it's not turning in this way. I'm going to sew straight across here with a stitch length of 3.0. I've already back stitched. You do want to back stitch at both ends, and I'm just going to hold that foam out of the way. And now that I'm done sewing across, I'm just going to trim back the zipper. And now that you're done sewing that seam, you can flip this in this direction. Your seam will be facing down. You've eliminated a lot of bulk already because of the foam not being in the seam line here. And now you can just go ahead and stitch maybe 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch away from this edge right here. And I'll do that with a stitch length of 3.5. Now, to eliminate a little bit more of this bulkiness, you can just go ahead and clip these corners just like this. That way, that bulk will not end up in your seam line when you're sewing the main panel to this side panel here, this gusset. So we'll do that on both sides. And then you just want to go ahead and sew in the other side panel in exactly the same way. So now I'm moving on to step 5, which is the piping. And this is what we have so far. The sides are in, everything has been top stitched, and this is what the reverse side looks like. Now, we haven't done any top stitching along the zipper yet, and you don't want to do that just yet. Just leave that as it is for right now. This is my piping. I've made my own piping here. And I created it with 1/2 inch of tape here, which is what the seam allowance is in the pattern. Now I want to show you a little trick, because if you're using store-made piping, you're not going to get a 1/2 inch seam allowance. But this needs to be installed so that when you sew it in, the cording is 1/2 inch away from the edge. Now if you have Wonder clips, and you take your clip and you put it on something as far as it will go, you're going to see that the tip of that clip is 1/2 of an inch. So this is actually, the bite of this is 1/2 of an inch. Now you can take that and place your seam tape so that the cording is right at the edge of that clip there. As long as the clip is in all the way, that's going to give you 1/2 of an inch. And then you don't have to go measuring from the edge to the cording as you're placing in your piping. You can just keep adding in clips like this. And as long as the clip is on all the way and the edge of the clip there is butting up against the piping, then you will have your 1/2 inch seam line there. But since I already built in a 1/2 inch seam onto my cording, I don't have to do that. And you're going to start at one end. You want to leave yourself a long tail. Now I will show you how I like to butt my ends together at the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and clip this in all around. and you're going to come around your curves, and if you need to do some little clips to help that go around the curve, you certainly can do that. I did make my piping on the bias, so it should ease in there nicely. So go ahead and install your piping. Now I'll start sewing in the piping, and I left 2 long tails on each end here, but I don't want to start here. I want to start in a little bit because I want to leave those tails free for connecting them together later on. So I'll start in a little bit of a ways, and I am using a piping foot here. So I'm going to get that positioned, and then I'm going to sew all the way around with a stitch length of 3.0. You don't necessarily have to backstitch here if you don't want to. You want to make sure that the edge of the piping stays even with the edge of your gusset here. So I take the clip out and I try and hold it with my finger, and then I just sew slowly along, especially along the curves. I didn't have to do any clipping around my edges of my piping because I did make the piping on the bias, and it just curves around there nicely. You'll just keep going all the way around the entire piece. And now that I'm coming around to where I started, I want to stop right about here, and that will give me enough space to butt my ends together. And actually, I'm going to stop right about there. So here are the 2 tails that I need to join together. So I'm going to take this end right here and lay it down. And then when I get close to this side right here, I want to clip right before that other tail. So now I have this end clipped, and this end is still free. And what I need to do is cut this one off maybe a couple of inches away from this end. So I'm going to overlap them and cut about 2 inches away. So now I have this end cut off, this end is cut off, and it's laying on top of this piece of piping right here. What I need to do is unstitch all of this fabric. And now that I've unstitched that fabric away from the cording, I can pull the fabric back, and I want to lay these 2 ends together. So the cording from this side, I'm going to match up with the cording from this side right here, and I want to clip them even with each other. Try not to clip your fabric. And now these 2 blunt ends will sit together just like this. And then I'm going to take this fabric and I'm going to fold it under a little bit, about a ½ inch or so, and I'll open it up, and I'm going to lay this piece inside there. And then I'll fold the fabric over that opposite end. And then you're just going to fiddle with it, get it to all lay nice and flat and look pretty. And you'll put some clips in, and after your clips are in, you can go and finish sewing all the way across here. Now that I've joined the 2 ends together, I can continue to stitch across. My join is right here. So when I get to that point, I just want to make sure that my presser foot doesn't push this out of the way. Now I'm right at that join there, and I'm actually going to help it a little bit by doing a little bit of a hand stitch, because I don't want that presser foot to push that folded fabric out of the way. So here's my little fold right here, and once this gusset is sewn to the main panel, you're barely going to see that. Then the last thing that I like to do is baste down the tape of this piping. And the reason why I do that is sometimes when you're pinning things together, you see how this is rolling? Sometimes it'll roll this way and you don't realize it, and now you have a raw edge sticking out on the exterior part of your bag. So to avoid that, I just stitch 1/8 of an inch all around on that tape. You can do that with a stitch length of 3.5, whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. You just want to hold it in place right now. And that will totally avoid that tape from rolling to your exterior. So just go ahead and do that all the way around. Now we are on step 7 in the pattern instructions, which is to prepare the gusset lining. And I will also be showing you how to get started with the no drop-in lining. You want to take your 2 top panel pieces for the lining, and you want to fold back each long edge 1/2 of an inch and then press it. And then after you've done that, you're going to take the 2 edges here and you're going to clip them to one of the side panels. So just put in a few clips. And once you have everything clipped into place, you're going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam all the way across. Now in the pattern she tells you to do 5/8 of an inch, but because I'm doing the no drop-in lining, I'm doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So sew 1/2 inch all the way across, and I used a stitch length of 2.5. I already did this end. You can see here, this is the seam where I sewed these pieces together, and then I took the side panel and I opened it up with the seam facing towards the side panel, and then I just top stitched all the way across. So go ahead and do that, and I'm going to finish mine off camera. Take your exterior gusset and flip it over, and you want to take your double-sided sticky tape. You could use the fabric tack glue for this also if you want to, and I'm going to lay a line of tape all along the top edge of that foam. I've already done this to the other side. And then once you have it in place, just make sure that it sticks down well. You want to take off the relief paper. And then you're going to take your zipper and you're going to fold it so that the zipper is adhered to that tape. So you basically folding it over the edge of that zipper tape over the adhesive tape. I'll move these out of the way a little bit. And it should stick down very nicely. And then once you have that all stuck down in place, I'm going to close the zipper again. I'm going to put another row of this tape on each side. And this time I'll kind of straddle the zipper tape and the foam all the way across. Again, you can use the glue for this too if you prefer. Make sure it's sticking down nicely. And then I'm just going to take the relief paper off of one side. And I'm going to take the lining gusset. And I want to line the edges of the lining with the edge of the exterior panel. Match up these seams right here. You can put a few clips in place there to hold it for you. And then you want to take the lining and lay it down over the tape there. And that tape should be holding everything very nicely in place for you. Then you'll go ahead and do the same exact thing to the other side. You'll flip it over, take off the relief paper, and line everything up and stick this down over the tape. After you have everything stuck down to the tape, just make sure that these folded edges here are far enough away from the zipper so that they don't get caught in the zipper pulls. Then you'll flip everything over and you'll stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this edge right here. And I'm going to stitch with a stitch length of about 4.0. Now normally I would stitch along the length and then I would stitch down to this row of top stitching, stitch across and up. But I can't because my hardware is too wide. So I'm just going to stitch each row just like this without going on the ends. I'm going to stitch a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch away from the edge here. And I'm going to have a little bit of a problem because I didn't have the proper size hardware, because I need to get all the way up to this seam edge right here. So we'll see how we do with that. If you're using 3/4 inch hardware, this is not going to be an issue for you at all. I think one way I can do it actually is turn it. And I'll come down this way first. Make it a little bit easier for my presser foot to do it that way. Then I can back up. Pivot again, and then come down the side. And I'll probably have to do the same thing at the other end. Hold your pulls out of the way. If you need to open them up, that's fine too. And I just realized I forgot to put my black thread back into the machine, but that's okay. So just go ahead and finish sewing in your zipper. You'll want to make sure that you caught the lining on the other side. Here's the result of my top stitching, and here is the underside. And you can go ahead and take all these clips out because we want these layers to be completely free of each other for when we're ready to do the no drop-in lining. So you can see now the lining is completely separate from the exterior except for where the top stitching is around the zipper. So the first thing that you need to do is draw the box for the zipper opening, and you'll find the placement of this box on your pattern piece. Then I flipped this over and I found the center of the main panel here, and I drew a line perpendicular to this center mark that's 1 inch above the top of the zippered pocket. So here's the opening for the zippered pocket. This line is 1 inch above this top line right here. And then the next thing I did was find the center of my pocket, and then I just lined up the center marks and I brought the raw edge up to that line that I drew perpendicular. And then I'm going to flip it, and then I'll put just a couple of pins in here to hold it in place. And then we're going to sew all around this box, and I'm going to do that with a 2.0 stitch length. Also, in addition to drawing the box, I drew a line right down the center with these arrows into the corners, and those will be my cutting lines for the zipper opening. I've dropped my needle right on that line that I drew, and I'm going to start sewing around at a stitch length of 2.0. You just want to sew right on top of that line all the way around. When you get to the corner, you'll stop with your needle down and you'll pivot, and you want to count how many stitches you take till you get to this bottom line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we'll pivot and sew along this line, and when we get to the other end we want to sew up 6 stitches, and that should give you a square opening. So we'll sew up 6, and assuming we've sewed everything completely parallel, we should end up right at this top line right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we can pivot, and we'll sew a little bit over our previous stitches there. And by counting those stitches, what you've done is you've ensured that your box will be the same height on both sides. Now that I've sewn around the box, I'm just going to cut it open. I'll fold it in half right on that line, and I'll cut in just a little bit just to start an opening there. And then I can clip all the way up to where my arrows are. And once I get to that point, I want to clip in at a 45-degree angle, and I want to clip right up to that line of stitching. So make sure that you don't clip through it. You'll do that in all 4 corners, and it helps to have a nice pair of scissors that's sharp right to the tip. And then I'll do the same thing to the other side. And then once I'm finished cutting that opening, I want to go over to the iron, and I will iron back these seams. And I typically only do it from one side. So I will iron this seam open, I'll iron the seam open on the opposite side, and then I want to take that triangle and push it this way and iron that triangle open. After you iron the seams open, you can just take your pocket and push it through to the other side. Then once it's pushed through to the other side, you're going to iron down all of these seams. You want the seam to be falling right at the top there, all the way around, and then press everything nicely. The opening is ready for the zipper, so I'm just going to take my zipper right here, and I'm going to put a little bit of the fabric tack glue right along the edge. And you don't need a lot. You just need a little bit to be tacky enough to hold in place while you're sewing it. And now I'll take the window and I'm going to place it right over that zipper there. You just want to center it nicely, press it down, and let it dry in place. After the glue is dried, we'll sew right around this box, approximately 1/8 to less than 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Right now, my zipper pull is out here, and when I get to that spot, I'll just push it in. I like to keep it out of the way when I'm sewing the box. Then when we're done with that, we'll flip this over. At that point, you'll be able to trim off the ends of the zipper, and then we'll just fold this up, and then we'll sew along 3 sides. Just like that. I'm sewing around the box with a stitch length of 2.5. And then just like you did before, count how many stitches you go down the side, and then you'll want to go up the same amount of stitches on the opposite side. And then I'm going to stop right there, lift up my presser foot, and then I'm just going to push that zipper tab through the window. I called it a zipper tab, it's really a zipper pull. And then you can sew a little bit over your previous stitching where you began. And just give a couple of little back stitches. So before I clip off these ends, I just want to make sure that the zipper got caught in all of the stitching, and it did. And then I can just pull these back and just snip a little bit closer. Then I'll just fold this up, and I'm going to put just a few clips in just to hold it in place. The pocket is all clipped in place, so I'm going to flip it over so that the pocket is actually facing the bed of the machine, and then I'm going to sew around the 3 sides. So I'll start at the bottom, go across the top, and then go down the other side. I'll sew the stitch length of 2.5. You can do a 1/2 inch seam here, 1/4 inch seam. It doesn't really matter at this point. This is step 9 in the pattern instructions, which is to attach the bottom panels to the main panels for both the exterior and the lining pieces. So you'll take your main panel and you will clip it to the bottom panel here. And then after it's clipped, you're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam. Now what I like to do is I always draw a line. That's my stitching line. It's 1/2 inch down from that edge right there, and I'll use that line to sew on. Especially when I'm working with bulky materials, it really helps to keep you on track. So you'll sew that, and I will sew it with a seam with a stitch length of 3.5. Then after you sew it on there, so here's the other side that I've already sewn on, you're going to flip this piece up, so it will have been like this. You'll flip it up, and then you're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this edge, and you're actually stitching on the bottom panel, and I stitched that with a stitch length of 4.0. Now for the lining, you'll do exactly the same thing. I've already sewn the bottom to one of the panels, and now I'm going to take the other panel and put them right sides together. Now on this one I sewed all the way across, but on this one I'm not going to sew all the way across, and the reason why is because I'm actually going to turn my bag through the bottom of the lining. So I'm just going to put in a couple of clips, and then I did the same thing. I drew my stitching line right here, but I'm also going to make a few marks for where I want to stop and stop. For where I want to start and stop. And I'll just sew from the edge to here, and then from here to the edge. And I'm going to sew it with a stitch length of 2.5. Now I did make both of these seams here 1/2 inch. The pattern says 5 inches. The pattern says 5/8 of an inch, but I did 1/2 of an inch on each side. I'm sewing across that bottom panel with a stitch length of 3.5. And do back stitch at both ends, and try to stay on the line the best you can. Then after you're done sewing the seam, you can flip the other panel up. Here's the seam that you just sewed. You want it facing towards the bottom of the bag. I'm going to turn it with the right side up, and now I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from that edge there. And this is sewing on the bottom panel. And I'll stitch with a stitch length of 4.0. Now you'll notice I'm not using a Teflon foot. I have found with this particular vinyl I really don't need one, so I'd rather not use it if I don't have to. Now I'm sewing the bottom lining panel with a stitch length of 2.5. And I'll stop at that mark and backstitch. And then I'll slide over to the other end and start at the mark here and backstitch at the beginning and the end. And now I have a nice big opening to turn the bag. Here are both the lining and the exterior with the bottom panel sewn in. I have this nice opening here for turning the bag. And now we're on to step 10, which is assembly. And assembly is always really exciting for me because I know my bag is getting close to being done. We're going to sew the lining into the gusset first. So you need to find your centers, the center of these panels and the center of your bottom panels. So I just fold in half and then I clip at the center. I've already done these two. Now we'll do this one. You want to match up your side seams here. And then just follow that up to the top center. And then put in a really tiny clip. And then for the bottom, you'll just put the seams together and pull that out until you get to the center, and again another tiny clip. Then you need to take the gusset with the lining side up and find your centers there. You need the center of the sides, the bottom sides, and the center of these top panels where your zipper is. So you'll do exactly the same thing. You're just going to fold in half and work it up to the center there and make a little clip. And then you'll do the same thing with the top panel. Just match up the sides and bring it up to the center and make a little clip. And I've already marked all of mine. After you have all of your center points marked, you're going to take your lining, and with right sides together you're going to take the right side of a main panel and you're going to clip it to the right side of the zipper panel, the top panel, and match up those notches, and I like to put a couple of clips in each side. So on each side of the notch I have a clip. And then I do the same thing on this side. I'm just going to match that notch up with this notch here. And actually I want to put my clips in this way because I am going to be sewing from the gusset side. Then you want to match up the bottom center panel with the side center. You'll do that on both sides. And then after you have all four centers clipped into place, you're going to pick this up, and I like to do this from the gusset side. I'm just going to match up the edges here, and I roll it around my finger to ease everything in, and then you're just going to start clipping until you get to the clips on the center bottom here. It's really important to keep all of your edges together. Now for the lining, I do use the Wonder Clips. They're strong enough to hold everything together. But when I do the exterior, I will be using the binder clips. So just keep pinning down and keep easing everything in. If when you get to the bottom you have some extra fabric, then just go back, take out a few clips, and start easing again. And it will all fit together, assuming you've cut correctly and sewn correctly. I have the lining clipped in all around, and you can see I've used a lot of clips. Now I'm going to tell you a couple of secrets for getting this all eased in nicely. Number one, you want to make sure that all of the edges are even. If they're not, you're going to end up with extra fabric somewhere. Then the other thing is, I like to ease it in from the gusset side. And down here is a good example because this is all very rounded. I really push it in like this with my fingers, and I make sure that the edges are even, and then I put in my clip. And you just want to do that all around. And the other thing is, I really do take a lot of time to clip everything in. I want to make sure when I sit down to sew this that I'm not going to get any puckers or surprises anywhere. And then when you sew it, I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.5 and just go slowly. And I will be sewing it with the gusset side up. Now I am sewing this with a stitch length of 2.5, and my seam allowance now is going to be 5/8 of an inch. And the other thing I want to say is, if you're a little afraid to sew it in, then just sew it in with a basting stitch first. Maybe sew it in with a stitch length of about 4.0. And then you can go in and check it out, and if everything looks good, then you would just re-sew with a permanent stitch over your basting stitch. That's always a good option. So we will backstitch here. And I take my time, I go slowly. I want to make sure that my edges stay even. And it's really easy for them to pull apart. Especially when you take your clips out, they like to pull apart. So just go slowly all the way around. And you'll keep readjusting. Make sure that you keep the exterior out of the way. You can see I'm already off by a little bit. I don't worry about anything that small. It's when it really starts to pull apart that I get concerned. So you just want to keep readjusting. Make sure that you don't get any puckers. Now if you do get a pucker in there, just keep going, and then you can take the stitching out later and re-stitch over the area, and you can usually smooth it right out. once I'm done sewing in the lining, I like to take a look all the way around to see if all of my edges stayed even. And for the most part, I did a pretty good job. It is a challenge, I will tell you. It is definitely a challenge. That's why I go slow. That's why I use so many clips. And then the other thing I can do is push it to the outside here and inspect it this way. I just want to make sure that there's nothing really wrong going on. I have a tiny little pucker there. I can fix that. So I just go ahead and I inspect the whole thing. And once I'm happy with it, then I move on to putting in the exterior panels. Now, we will trim these seams down, these 5/8 inch seams, but I never trim anything until I'm absolutely 100% sure I'm happy with everything. So now you want to go ahead and find the center points of your exterior panel here on both the side panels, the top panels, and you also want to find all the center points on your main exterior panel, and you're going to do that exactly the same way we did for the lining. And then you're going to start clipping everything in place, just like we did with the lining, but now you're probably going to want to use some of your binder clips. Now to clip in your main panel here, you want to make sure that your zipper is open this time, and you want the exterior facing up. Then you'll go ahead and clip all of those center points together. So just match those up, take a clip, and put it on there. And I'm going to match all of my centers first. Then after you match your centers, you'll do exactly the same thing. I like to do it from the gusset side. I'm going to push everything around my fingers just like this, and then I'll put in a clip. Make sure those edges stay even. And just bring the edges up together and press around just like this. And clip. You'll work your way all the way up to the top this way. It's really the same exact thing that we did for the lining. Now you see how slippery this is? This is why I use the binder clips for this. And you'll want to set in all 4 sides like this. I like to do it in sections. So we have 4 center marks, so that's 4 sections. And then just keep clipping. I have the exterior gusset clipped all around the bag. You can see I've used a ton of clips. Here's what the bottom looks like. And here's the other side. And again, especially around these corners right here, these rounded corners, you just want to take the gusset and push it in to the outer bag. And when you push it in, you clip it in place. Make sure that all of your edges are staying even. And pushing it in like this, that helps ease the gusset into the main part of the bag. So now I'm going to sew this. We will sew it from the gusset side, which is right here, and this line of stitching right here, right where the bottom of the clip is, that is the line of stitching that we put the piping in with, and we want to stay right on that line of stitching as we sew. And I'll start in the center of one of these panels and stitch completely around. I'll use a stitch length of 3.5 and just go slow. Okay, so here we go. Let's see how we do. Again, stitch length 3.5, and we're just going to follow that previous line of stitching when we sewed in the piping. And I'll take out the clips right as I get to them. I'm sewing from the gusset side. Try and make sure that those edges stay even. And I'm really not a speed sewer. I can if I want to, but I enjoy sewing, and I'm not looking to rush it. And I'm not doing it for production, so I can take my time and enjoy the process. This right here, this is the lining side. I just pulled it out of the bag. When I rush, I usually am not happy with my results. When I take my time, I'm much happier. I'm not saying that I do it perfectly, but I'm much happier with my result. And just keep readjusting everything. Push things out of the way when they need to be pushed out of the way. With that reduction in bulk, my machine is definitely handling this better than it did the first bag I made. So just keep working your way around one clip at a time until you get back to where you started. As you get towards the bottom panel, you'll actually be standing the bag up. I'm getting close to being there now. I always make sure that everything feels flat to me. I always try and feel with my fingers to make sure everything is laying flat. And you can feel underneath with your fingers. So just keep working your way around. I finished sewing all around the bag. Now you remember, I reduced the bulk. That made it a little bit easier for the machine, but I still actually had a lot of thread breakage. So I think if I make another one of these, I will definitely use a heavier weight thread when it comes to sewing the exterior portions together. So now I've checked everything out. What I like to do is peek in the best I can to make sure everything looks good. I feel around to see if I feel for any problems, and everything feels good to me. So now is when I will go ahead and trim those seams, and I'm going to trim both the exterior and the lining down to about 1/4 of an inch, and then I will turn the bag right side out. Now that I have everything trimmed down on the exterior and the lining, I can start turning the bag right side out. So I'll just reach in through that lining, where I left the opening, and then I'm going to grab the bag right here, and I'm just going to start pulling. And you are going to be crushing the bag to turn it right side out, but the vinyl actually will recover. You can actually go in with your iron from the lining side and just lightly press it, and it's amazing how it recovers from being crushed. So just keep pushing, pulling. And then when you get the bag, mostly with the exterior on the outside, you can start pushing out all of the corners. And then I just like to reach in through the lining. Actually, I can push the lining in here, and then I reach into the bag, and with my hands I just start shaping everything. So here's where we are right now. Everything's looking pretty good. You can see the sides here. And here's the lining on the inside. Everything's laying pretty flat in there. I do have to go and close up that bottom. But so far, so good. And now what we need to do is create our handles. Now we are on step 12, which is to make the shoulder strap and the handles. So you can see I've already made my shoulder strap and one of the handles. And I did do it differently than the pattern because I like to have vinyl on one side and fabric on the other. I will demonstrate how to make the other handle, and you will make the shoulder strap in exactly the same way. To make my handles, I started out with a piece of vinyl that was only 2 inches wide, cut to the length that the pattern instructions tells you to. Then I drew a line straight down the center of that vinyl handle. And I put a piece of sticky tape on both sides of that line. Now I'm going to peel off the release paper over here. And also I just want to point out, don't bring your sticky tape all the way to the ends here. Just leave yourself about 1 inch or 2 of room at the ends. And then I'm going to fold the long edges in towards that line that I drew on the center. And you want to do this on both sides. Just press it down. Try and stay right up onto that line there. And then just do this all along the length on each side. Here's my vinyl handle. I have both long ends taped down to the center there, and my ends are open on both sides. Then I took a piece of my cloth fabric and I cut a strip that was 2 inches wide, but it's 3 inches shorter than this strip. So whatever length you choose for your handles, if you do the pattern instruction length or whatever, you want to make this piece 3 inches shorter than this piece here. Then you'll go ahead and clip both ends, and we're going to sew this with a stitch length of about 2.5 and a 1/4 inch seam. And you want to sew both ends on. Make sure that none of your fabric gets twisted. And I'm going to do that off camera. My ends are sewn together, and now you have a big loop. So vinyl on one side, the fabric on the other side. And we want to fold the ends here back towards the center, and I'm just going to put in a couple of temporary clips. And I'm going to do that to the fabric side as well, and then also do this on both ends. And then once you have everything clipped, I take it and I pull it out straight. And what's going to happen is, because we cut this shorter than the vinyl, it will bend over, the vinyl will fold over towards the fabric side, and you want to get about the same amount of vinyl on each side. So the amount that gets folded over should be equal on each side. So I have a little bit more here. I'll just make an adjustment. Clip that in place. And then once you're happy with the amount of vinyl that is flipping over to the other side, you want them to be equal. So I do have to do some more adjustment on mine. You want to put the wrong side of this handle to the wrong side of the vinyl. And then you will clip all the way down the length. And then sew 1/8 of an inch all the way around the entire handle. I've played around with mine some more to make the amount of vinyl that's folding over towards the fabric side even. And then after I did that, I just clipped both the cloth and the vinyl part of the handle in place with the wrong sides together. So now when I sew, I'm going to go across the top, all the way down the length, across this end, back up, and then I'll end here with some back stitching over the original stitches. And I'll stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edges with a stitch length of 3.5. And I'm going to go and do that off camera. Now that I'm done sewing that handle, I can just slip it onto my hardware and clip it in place. I've already clipped this end on, and I am going to sew this. I will sew it from the wrong side, and I'll just stitch across a few times with a stitch length of 3.5 or 4. You can also put rivets in here instead of sewing it if that's how you'd like to do it. So there we go. The bag is complete, and I'm very happy with the way it turned out, even though I had some trouble with my machine. Now, I will say this. I think the reason why I had the trouble is because of the nature of the glitter vinyl, because I have made bags that actually do have more bulk than this one did, and my machine did fine. So I think it was really an issue with the glitter vinyl. It's sort of abrasive, and I think that was why I had trouble with the thread breaking. And if I switched to a heavier thread, I think that would solve that problem. So I hope that you've enjoyed watching this video as much as I have enjoyed putting it together for you. Thank you to all of the people who have supported me by subscribing to my channel and liking my videos. And if you're not already a subscriber, I would love to have you. So please like and subscribe.